Chapter 1. Texas, 1891. Heath Wolf sat on a stool at his family's square oak table. His two children were seated on either side of him. Steam from the stew in their bowls rose like ghosts, disappearing halfway up to the slanted log ceiling of the cabin. The scent was aromatic and comforting in its familiarity, a common supper that their housekeeper of 2 years had made for them often. It was the last meal she would prepare. She was moving north to live with her daughter and had said her goodbyes earlier that day. To Heath's right sat Biddy, who barely rose to his belt buckle, but who made up for her small stature with exuberance that seemed to redouble with every one of her 5 years. Her given name was Elizabeth, but ever since she was born, scrawny as a kitten, a few ounces shy of 5 pounds, everyone called her Biddy instead of Betty for short. Jack sat to Heath's left, squirming as young boys of 8 do, and looking down at his stew with hunger, impatient to be through with the inconvenience of prayer. Heath folded his hands in front of him. "Jack, would you say grace?" As his son murmured words of thanks for the food, for the green grass and fat cattle and the healthy calves, Heath prayed for the right words to tell his children. He was about to change their lives and wanted to sound resolved in his decision, though he didn't feel it. He worried he was about to make a very big mistake. At the end of the prayer, Heath placed his napkin in his lap and cleared his throat. "I have some important news to share with you, children. As you know," he looked at Jack. "Son, use your spoon." Jack had already lifted the bowl to his lips. He lowered it only after taking a generous slurp. "But this way is faster, Pa," he argued. "That doesn't matter. It's impolite." Heath tried to sound firmer than he felt. He didn't want manners to go completely by the wayside, but it was difficult for him to care too much about such niceties, being the only living parent to 2 children who not only needed food, shelter, and clothing provided for them, but also those provisions prepared, maintained, and sewn. Table manners were low on the list of priorities, especially in the wake of their housekeeper's departure. Heath drained the stew from his spoon noiselessly in an attempt to model polite behavior, then dipped it in the fragrant broth again. "As I was saying, I have some important news. You both know Miss Willow McAllister, don't you? She's been known to sleep in the town livery from time to time." The children nodded their heads. It was as he expected. There was no one in town who didn't know the wild Willow McAllister. She was practically a legend as a result of her troublesome behavior. Her mother had tried to steer her straight, but raising a child alone was no easy feat, as Heath could attest. And when Willow's mother passed away 3 years ago, the teenage girl had become even wilder. Willow's latest offense was public drunkenness and vandalism. In the middle of the night, she'd gotten liquored up with one of her hooligan friends. Together, they had thrown rocks at the windows of a house owned by a woman who had insulted her, breaking all but one of them. The town marshal arrested her and let her stew in jail for 24 hours before setting her free on the condition that she find a job within 3 days and stay out of trouble. Otherwise, he would lock her up again and press serious charges. Marshal Clyde told Heath all about it, how he was worried about Willow and what would become of her if she didn't straighten up. That was where Heath was to come in. "Well," Heath said after swallowing another bite of stew, "she's coming to live with us. I've arranged with the marshal to give her a job and home here." Jack cocked his head. "Really, Pa? You want her to live here? Don't you know she's nothing but trouble?" "That may be so, but she needs a place to stay, and we need a lady in the house. She can do the cleaning and Cooking. It will be to all our benefit." Jack's brow furrowed in the exact same way his mother's used to. Sometimes the resemblance between them would catch Heath by surprise and send a bolt of sorrow straight through him, like lightning through a lone tree in a meadow. It happened less frequently these days, but the saddening effect always was the same. The boy shook his head. "She ain't no lady. She chews tobacco and spits farther than any man I know. Plus, she steals. The teacher thinks it was her who stole our lunches from the mudroom of the schoolhouse a couple of months ago. We have to keep our lunches next to us every morning now, and it makes the whole room smell like rotten eggs." Heath knew about that, as well as many of Willow's other exploits the marshal had made him privy to. He'd already weighed the risk of her misbehavior against the family's need for help. He also felt obligated to do his part to help the girl. After malaria had spread throughout Thorndale at breakneck speed, many children were left orphaned, and good homes were in short supply. At 19, Willow wasn't a child anymore, but she couldn't seem to provide for herself without stealing, and Heath made a good living doing ranching work. He knew it would be to Willow's benefit for her to be part of a family and participate in making an honest wage. "Well, son, I reckon she stole the lunches because she was hungry," Heath said. "Until you've had hunger gnawing away in your gut for days straight, it's best not to judge. While living here, she'll have 3 square meals a day, so she'll have no cause to steal." Heath didn't share with the children the marshal's request that Heath discipline the girl if she acted up while in his care, using whatever method he thought would be most effective. The implication was that Heath give her a thorough hiding whenever she got out of line, but he had never raised a hand to his children and could not see the benefit of spanking a full-grown woman, troublesome though she might be. He rather hoped he could convince her to settle into a new life, using gentler methods of persuasion. Heath looked at Biddy, who had abandoned the stew and was sliding down her chair while gazing out the window. He didn't know if she'd listened to a word he'd said. "Biddy, sit up straight and eat your supper, please." She made a face but obeyed, slurping a spoonful of stew into her mouth. Using a stern tone, he said, "I expect you both to make Miss Willow feel welcome and to help her with chores. If you don't, I'll come home and give you more chores. Is that understood?" Their eyes rounded slightly at the threat. They nodded and murmured their agreement. "I'll be fetching her tomorrow afternoon. Jack, I want you to sleep in my room tonight, and Willow will take your room. Move everything from inside your desk and dresser to the office by tomorrow morning." Jack dropped his spoon and stared at him in horror. "But, Pa, that's my room. I don't want—" Heath held up his hand. "No bellyaching. We'll get a cot and clear out the office next week. It'll be a fine room for you. We need to make sure Willow is as comfortable as possible. Giving her a home is the right thing to do, for all of us, and we're going to do it." Heath wished he felt as confident as he sounded.